I can't tell you how proud I am to be here, not only to be introducing such a wonderful scholar, but also a friend. So, the Mississippi Humanities Council is pleased to honor Dr. Courtney Luckhardt for her outstanding teaching here at the University of Southern Mississippi. Every year, we recognize a Humanities Teacher Award winner at each of our state's colleges and universities. The awardee is asked to present a lecture on a humanities-based related subject of their choice, and we can see we're going to be quite entertained tonight, and receives a cash award and a free ticket to the annual banquet dinner, which is held later March 27th in Jackson. At that point, if you wanted to come, Dr. Luckhardt also is going to be publicly recognized, so the fun will continue. We at the Humanities Council believe that it is important to recognize the excellence of humanities teachers and highlight the importance of the humanities to creating engaged and informed citizens. At the Mississippi Humanities Council, we believe that the humanities are for everyone, and this is true for both students here at USM and for people in Hattiesburg and the Gulf Coast and beyond, everywhere across the state of Mississippi. The Council is an independent, nonprofit organization supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and also by grants and donations from private foundations, corporations, and individuals. The Council, in turn, supports and develops a wide range of programs across Mississippi that help us explore our rich history and culture. I know many of my colleagues in here have been very involved in the grants that the Humanities Council does. We create opportunities for Mississippians to learn about themselves and the larger world and enrich communities through civil conversations by promoting lifelong learning in our state. We invite all of you to join us in this work. Please visit our website, MississippiHumanities.org, or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram to learn more. And again, we're so very proud of Dr. Luckhardt. Thank you.
Now I want to introduce Dr. Courtney Luckhardt. She is an assistant professor of history in the School of Humanities and a specialist in medieval studies. She completed her PhD at the University of Notre Dame, and her book, The Charisma of Distant Places, Travel and Religion in the Early Middle Ages, was published by Routledge in 2019. Her scholarly record mirrors her scholarly interest in travel. She has presented her research in England, Belgium, Norway, Ireland, Scotland, and throughout the US. Not sure how she did all of that.
On purpose.
Including at the notorious International Congress on Medieval Studies in Kalamazoo, which, if you have not heard about, apparently is quite the party. Because medievalists, I have been told, like to dance.
It's true.
And perhaps, right?
No, we don't do that.
I have this on good authority. Her presentation today focuses on the uses of medievalism in the contemporary world, from politics to popular culture. So please welcome Courtney Luckhardt.
Thank you. So, thank you all for being here. This is a wonderful turnout, and thank you to those of you who are not receiving extra credit as well for being here. All right. So, if there was ever a patron saint of the historical profession and of medieval historians in particular, it would be this man, Marc Bloch. Marc Bloch was arguably the most important historian of the 20th century. He was a French Jew, and he was murdered by Nazi firing squad on June 16th, 1944. When World War I began, in 1914, Bloch was 28 years old, and he enlisted in the infantry as a non-commissioned officer, despite having a PhD, and served with such distinction that he was awarded the two highest military honors of France, the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honor. But World War I was not to be his only war. When World War II broke out in 1939, Bloch, by then a famous historian at the Sorbonne University in Paris, was mobilized as an officer. He was stationed at Strasbourg on the border between France and Germany. After the Germans overran the Maginot Line in May 1940, Bloch disguised himself in civilian clothing and fled north to his family home in Normandy. In June 1940, he fought in the Battle of Dunkirk and was evacuated to Britain. That summer in Britain, he wrote Strange Defeat, his first-hand account of the war thus far, and what he viewed as the causes of the fall of France. So in the introduction to that book, he wrote, "By birth I am a Jew, though not by religion, for I have never professed any creed, whether Hebrew or Christian. I feel neither pride nor shame in my origins. I am, I hope, a sufficiently good historian to know that racial qualities are a myth, and that the whole notion of race is an absurdity. I am at pains to never stress my heredity, save when I find myself in the presence of an anti-Semite. France, from which many would like to expel me today, and may, for all I know, succeed in doing so, will remain, whatever happens, the one country with which my deepest emotions are inextricably bound up. I was born in France. I have drunk the waters of her culture. I have made her past my own. I breathe freely only in her climate, and I have done my best, with others, to defend her interests." Despite the German occupation, Bloch wished to return to France. In 1941, he was granted only one of 10 exemptions to the ban on employing Jewish academics in Vichy France, based on his reputation as one of the foremost historians of France. In 1942, when the Vichy government essentially fell, Bloch was 56 years old. He left his teaching post to join the French resistance in Lyon. In the resistance, he quickly became the head of the regional organization in southern France. He edited an underground newspaper, he created codes for use against the Nazis, he organized supplies and materials, etc. His prominence as both an academic and within the organization made him a target. And in March 1944, he was arrested by the Gestapo, along with 63 other people, and imprisoned. In prison, he was interrogated by the notorious SS officer Klaus Barbie, who was called the Butcher of Lyon. While we do not have an account of Bloch's torture, he spent 4 weeks in the prison infirmary in May 1944, suffering from pneumonia and serious contusions, which are consistent with Barbie's preferred torture techniques of prolonged ice water bath exposure and beatings with rubber batons. The evening of June 16, 1944, 10 days after the Allied invasion of France, 28 members of the resistance were taken from their cells at Montluc prison in Lyon. Handcuffed in pairs, the men were put onto an open truck and driven to an empty field outside a little village nearby. They were taken 4 by 4 into the field for execution. The youngest prisoner was a 16-year-old boy. The oldest was a short, balding man of 58 wearing round glasses. They were handcuffed together. As the Nazi executioners took aim, the boy said, "This is gonna hurt." The older man replied, "No, my boy, it doesn't hurt." They held hands, and the older man shouted, "Vive la France," as machine gun fire rang out. So died Marc Bloch. In his last will and testament, written in 1941, when he returned to France, Marc Bloch said, "Therefore I affirm, face to face with death as it were, that I was born a Jew, and I have never entertained any thoughts of either denying it or being tempted to do so. In a world afflicted with the most atrocious barbarity, is it not the generous tradition of the Hebrew prophets, which Christianity, in its purest form, has adopted in order to expand upon, one of the best reasons to live, to believe, and to struggle?" He asked that the Latin words "dilexit veritatem" be his only epitaph. He loved the truth. What was Marc Bloch's truth? I've given you his biography, as it is an extraordinary one. And yet, if he had only been a soldier, or a Frenchman, or a Jew, or a victim of the Nazis, he would not be much remembered today, Because while he did live his truth, as he put it in his testament, "I am dying as I lived an honorable Frenchman." However, Marc Bloch's truth was even more profound than that patriotism and that idealism.
Bloch was the founder, along with others, of an entirely new way of studying history from below. Historical study until then was often just the telling of the stories of great or powerful men. Instead, Bloch thought that the history of everyday life, including the economic actions of ordinary people, the geographical environment, the social conditions of all levels of society, were worthy of investigation.
This approach, called the Annales School after the name of the journal that he and his best friend and colleague at the Sorbonne, Lucien Favre, founded, it's now so ingrained in the way that historians work that it seems obvious. And this is what all truly great and revolutionary ideas seem like, given enough time. Totally obvious. But he was also a medieval historian, and he wrote an important book on feudalism, is feudal society there. So feudalism, that is a political system in which political power is exercised through personal oaths of loyalty between the rulers and the ruled, rather than through constitutional norms. Basically the mafia, right? So his book was different, though, in describing this system than all those that had come before it, because he took the point of view of the ruled, the peasants as its focal point, not that of kings and aristocrats. So his most famous book is The Historian's Craft, and I literally assigned this last semester in my graduate seminar, so we're still reading this book today. The French title is Apologie pour l'histoire, right, which comes from the Greek word apologia, which means a formal defense. So it's not an apology, it's not an expression of regret, it's a defense. And he's writing a defense of history in the darkest days of World War II. Between 1941 and 1942, when he was teaching in Vichy, France, and that's when he wrote this book. So in it, he uses his new approaches to history, but more importantly, he asks what he viewed as the most essential question, which he posed as coming out of the mouth of his young son, "Daddy, what is the use of history?" So, of all people, right, Marc Bloch is acutely aware of the terrible uses that history can be put to. And his answer to that question, why history, is twofold. So first, he says history is entertaining. It's full of amazing stories, like his own story, or like the stories of medieval peasants that he himself was fascinated by, who told bawdy jokes, who invented new farming technology, who rose up in political rebellions against their lords, who were people, with the same joys and griefs that people of every time and every culture have felt. But if history was just good stories, if it was just entertaining, then we should all just watch Ancient Aliens on the History Channel and call it a day, right? That's all. Hope not, right? But, so Marc Bloch said that the poetry of history, the emotions, the entertainment value is part of it. That's not all there is to it. So a common maxim about why history is that those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. And yet, the people of the past were real people. They were not dolls dressed up in old-fashioned clothes here to teach us moral lessons. Marc Bloch recalled that in June 1940, the day of the German entry into Paris, as he and his fellow officers were standing around after the official surrender, one asked, "Are we to believe that history has betrayed us?" So we can use history, yes. It can guide us, yes. We can learn lessons from it, yes. We can understand our present from the past and learn from it. As the great Roman orator Cicero said, not to know what happened before one was born is to always be a child. But is this the source of history's legitimacy? If the past refuses to give up its secrets, or if our own reason fails us, is it therefore useless to study history? The legitimacy of history is not because it teaches us lessons. Marc Bloch wrote in the middle of a world war in which he saw the utter failure of the world to learn the lessons of the past. And yet he did not see this as a failure of history. Instead, the legitimacy of history comes from our ability to not just know things, not to just know facts, but to understand and explain them. So So we can reverse those lessons. Not only can we learn lessons for the present from the past, but we can also better understand history from our present world. This is historical empathy, and it's one of the best tools we have for understanding the past, the changes of human society over time. We can't hope to understand vanished civilizations if we don't understand how living human beings think and believe. All those dead people of the past were once living, breathing people full of complexity and contradiction, just like us current people. This is what makes history what Bloch called a thing in movement, because the questions that we ask as historians are inevitably shaped by our experiences. Sometimes we like to travel. So this is bias, yes? But spoiler alert, all humans have biases, including the ones who claim to write simple, objective, factual histories. As Marc Bloch demonstrated, the old so-called objective history of feudalism that was accepted up until his day was not objective at all. It was top-down. It left out the points of view of poor people. Likewise, as women, as people of color, as people of different faith traditions have entered the historical profession in the last 75 years, the questions that they ask are shaped by their own experience. Now, the second that my freshman students hear the word bias, when we talk about documents and primary sources, they want to throw them out and say they're biased. We can't learn anything from them. They tell us nothing about the past. But there are different kinds of bias. First, there's a bias that I'm talking about that helps you ask questions that other people overlooked. For instance, what were women's lives like in the Middle Ages? That question didn't start getting answered in large numbers or getting in-depth answers until the 1960s, when women started entering the historical profession in large numbers for the first time. So then there's the bias that shuts off questions, that says the answers are already predetermined, that this is the bias, right, that we should rightly shun. That of the shouting talking heads on cable news who have no need for facts because their ideology guides them. And as I tell my students, and you're all here and you're hearing this again, any damn fool can have an opinion, right? An argument, the difference between an argument and an opinion is that an argument is supported by evidence. And historians who practice our craft with integrity make arguments. Using evidence, we don't just spout off our opinions. And this is because, and I know it's shocking to everyone here, but a lot of the information on the internet is wrong. But it's not just the internet, my friends. A lot of information in books and textbooks is wrong or maybe just plain misleading. Many of the popular ideas about the Middle Ages are not based on up-to-date research on the period, but rather old or just completely false ideas. So, all these false ideas, this faux medieval culture is everywhere. So medieval historians call this practice medievalism because it doesn't actually refer to a real time in history or a place in history. It's all about fantasies. And most of these fantasies are set in an imaginary past that actually bears very little resemblance to the real one. So this mostly began in the 19th century in Europe with artistic movements like the Pre-Raphaelites in England, when they were basically creating the equivalent of medieval fanfic poetry and art. So this is a painting called Blue Closet by the artist Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And this is beautiful, and these women are wearing beautiful clothing that is not based on any textiles from the Middle Ages. And they are playing a musical instrument that never existed. It is not a real musical instrument. It just looked medieval to Dante Rossetti. So this same artistic medieval inspiration was also happening in Germany in the 19th century as well. So this is coming from England. Germany is doing the same thing. Richard Wagner wrote his famous Ring Cycle opera. This is where the women singing opera in horned helmets, Viking helmets, this is where that gets invented. That's not real, by the way. No horned helmets ever. So this is based on a medieval poem called the Nibelungenlied, which is another. So basically, he's curating another piece of fan art here. Now, medievalism medievalism is not always a bad thing, right? So I myself enjoy a good bit of faux medieval culture, right? The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien was in fact a famous literary scholar of Old English. He was a medievalist. Who doesn't like Thor, right? And I may or may not have binge watched The Witcher over Christmas break, right? So, I mean, I like a little bit of that as well. So in pop culture, we even sometimes have it in real life. Yeah, so I'm gonna come out of the closet here and say that, yeah, I like to dress up as a pretty princess when I was a kid. This is me at the Renaissance Fair. That's me in blue, and that's my little sister in pink. I made my sister come. So, and I also shout out to my colleagues in the history department here. This is us mugging for the camera at graduation. We're wearing our academic regalia, which is based on the robes that students and professors wore in the 12th century at the University of Paris, one of the first universities in Europe. So again, right, we all still like to dress up. So the problem here isn't the fantasy Middle Ages. The problem is when people think that fantasy is real. And here's the thing. Medieval views of the nature of just war, of the treatment of women and minorities, of the development of good government were very different from our modern views of these topics today. Asking people to grapple with today that beliefs that would be considered racist or classist or even barbaric, it allows them to step outside their own worldview to another time and another culture. And it's the job of medieval historians to both research and teach on this subject, to make the Middle Ages accessible and relevant, but also to contradict these false and simplistic narratives about the pre-modern past. And these false narratives are everywhere. And while many fields of history have white supremacists trying to tell stories about history that are racist, the field of medieval history is particularly full of them. And so since the 19th century, German Romanticism in this period, this artistic movement that I mentioned, was Middle Ages obsessed. This is the Wagner opera that I mentioned. It also included architecture. So this is a fairy tale castle in Bavaria from 1868. It's not medieval. King Ludwig of Bavaria built it because as part of this artistic sort of imaginary Middle Ages. And it sounds innocent, right? And fantasies are fun. But the Nazis used these false ideas about the Middle Ages as a template for a new national identity that was founded on the extermination of minority groups. White nationalists in Europe today claim that their countries belong somehow to white people, looking back to an imaginary time of long-lost racial purity, a time that never existed, as recent research in medieval archaeology has shown that there were people of many ethnicities living in those regions in the pre-modern period. And racists here in the United States have used Viking visits in the 11th century to the territory they called Vinland, modern-day Newfoundland and eastern Canada, to claim European superiority in North America, despite the fact that the land belonged to the indigenous people and continued to do so because the Vikings were incredibly unsuccessful at founding new settlements in North America. So myth-busting is an important aspect of what medieval historians do. Not just to ruin your favorite films, although that's fun too, but it's to counter these evil and racist narratives. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to give you a few examples about how the Middle Ages has been used in the modern world and how an understanding of real medieval people helps us see ourselves in the modern world more clearly. So let's start with the Nazis. I know, so many Nazis. So much of our current 21st century misuses of the medieval past can be traced to their ideology in World War II. So Heinrich Himmler, seen there on the right-hand side, was the head of the SS and one of the main architects of the Holocaust. He was also obsessed with the medieval history of Germany, as most Nazis were. So Himmler created a historical research division inside the SS, devoted to trying to find, devoted to genealogy and trying to find their pure German ancestors. And many nationalists in the 19th and the 20th centuries supported this, not just Nazis. The Third Reich, which means empire in German, was built upon the foundation that it was a rebirth of the first German empire in the 10th century, the early Middle Ages. And so while there was no such race ancestor for Heinrich Himmler to find, he latched on to this king here, Henry of Saxony, the first Holy Roman Emperor who ruled from 919 to 936 CE. He was buried at the Abbey Church in Quedlinburg, which is now in northern Germany. But in 1936, Himmler's obsession with this medieval king led him to hold a special 1,000-year anniversary of his death celebration in the crypt at Quedlinburg for this early medieval aristocrat, even though the body had been lost in the Intervening millennium. And then they miraculously found it in 1937, a year after the ceremony. So Himmler gave a speech at that event in which he cataloged the supposed ways in which the medieval king had prefigured the Nazis. Supposedly, like them, he had been militarily efficient. He had expanded his territory into what is now Poland and Hungary, and he had created a German Reich with speed and efficiency. For those things, Himmler concluded that, quote, "We can best honor him for Germany by giving our total loyalty to the man who, after a hiatus of 1,000 years, has taken up King Henry's legacy, our Führer, Adolf Hitler." This tells us nothing about the medieval past. Henry I would not recognize himself in Himmler's portrait. Henry spoke a Germanic language, yes. It is now called Old Saxon or Old Low German, but he would have never have thought of himself as German. He was a military leader who fought Germanic-speaking peoples as much as he fought Slavic-speaking peoples or those speaking Hungarian. His territorial empire comprised a small fraction of what is now today the nation-state of Germany. And most importantly, his ideas about power were completely different from that of the modern Nazis. So medieval kingship, especially within the nascent Holy Roman Empire, was not absolute dictatorship. It was instead contingent upon alliances with other aristocrats who actually elected their king from among these aristocrats. Political communities were not homogeneous. Instead, they were diverse with lots of legal and cultural traditions jostling one another. Even the Christian religious traditions of Henry and his son, Otto the Great, would have been anathema to the Nazis. This is not just because they were Catholic Christians, which was frowned upon in Nazi Germany, but that the saint they actually prized, Henry and Otto did, was actually this saint, Saint Maurice. So the legend of Saint Maurice is that he was a Roman soldier in Egypt who was posted to the Rhine River frontier in the 3rd century, and he was said to have refused to kill Christians while in the army, and then he was executed by his commanding officer for refusing to follow orders. So as you can see, the medieval depictions of him are in Germany throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance depicted him as black. This statue is from the 13th century, from 1240 in Magdeburg, Germany. That is from a manuscript, German manuscript from the Renaissance from Halle, Germany. And here we see someone trying to appropriate these ideas. Now, this is King Henry's favorite saint. This is Himmler's guy. He has no concept of what the Middle Ages was actually about. So like the Nazis of the 20th century, these 21st century neo-Nazis are adopting St. Maurice's crest. You can see it's the same crest he's holding there, right? As the symbol of German or white superiority, having literally no idea about the real medieval history of this saint and those who venerated him. Yeah, I know. So what does this tell us about the present? This collapse in the distinction between past and present is seen as one of fascism's defining features. This circular logic in which the great men of history are defined by the degree to which their legacies can be shaped to mirror the propaganda needs of the current fascist present. So for fascists, if you cannot have a great man who does not prefigure Hitler, because that definition of greatness must lead to Nazism, right? So any person or idea that didn't fit this bill must not have been great, even if you have to make up the history that goes with it. So ideas about the glory of the Middle Ages, have been used by white supremacists to reduce this real and complex history of the Middle Ages to the supposed white origins of civilization. So for instance, those who marched in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017 used lots of medieval imagery. So we have a picture here of the man on the left who's the convicted murderer of Heather Heyer at that white supremacist rally, holding a shield with those crossed axes. These are called fasces. They were held by ancient Roman magistrates, that is judges, and they symbolized the Roman power. It was co-opted by the Italian fascist dictator Mussolini in World War II as a symbol of his power, and it was further bastardized by the white supremacist group Vanguard America, who marched at this rally. So another shield you see on display here is that of the so-called Black Sun on the far right, which is iconography from the Alemanni people, medieval people of the 7th century, who spoke a Germanic language and lived in the Rhine River Valley, but in no way would have considered themselves German. So what do they think that they're aping here, right? They have no idea that these are the real iconography that they're aping. This is the Roman iconography. They're from around 100, from a relief, and there's some Alemannic jewelry from the 7th century. Those men in the previous photo have no idea that this is the real history, right? What are they aping? They're aping the Nazis, right? So here's that Black Sun imagery. This is from the Welsburg Castle, the SS headquarters. Heinrich Himmler built this castle. And he, in his sort of main room in this tower, he puts this sort of medieval imagery, appropriating it for his fascist ideology. So current white supremacists are also obsessed with the Vikings. This includes everything from their mythology to the runes and the Old Norse language, which they view as products of a superior white culture. And while Old Norse is cool, and it's super cool, you guys, it is neither superior nor is it white. Vikings would not have identified themselves this way at all. And again, like we said about St. Maurice, medieval people did not use race as a category the way modern people do. So in terms of language then, linguists have done amazing work in the last 75 years to really understand ancient and medieval languages and their antecedents, including their relationships with one another, and this huge group of Eurasian languages that we call Indo-European, right? This does not include Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic, nor does it include East or Southeast Asian languages, but the Indo-European family, you can see on this gorgeous tree here. I know, I have to incorporate this somehow, right? It's so beautiful. These ideas about, you can see English there is over in the Germanic wing along with German, and the North Germanic languages here, which are our Scandinavian languages, right? But we also have all of the Romance languages, all of the Slavic languages, also the other branch of the tree that includes all of the subcontinental languages, including Hindi and Bengali, Persian languages, including Pashto and Punjabi, right? So this huge sort of group of related languages. These linguistic connections are important, as medieval people just didn't think about race the way we do. And instead, they did define themselves ethnically, but also those were usually similarities in language and culture. So language, dress, even hairstyle were considered ethnic markers to medieval people, rather than skin color. And it's not that they didn't notice skin color, right? They understood that people are, different, but it's just to them, that is not a marker of ethnicity. That's just not how they saw the world. And so white supremacists are trying to link themselves here to this language, to this culture, and even to early medieval Scandinavian actions, like the exploration of the North Atlantic in Iceland, Greenland, and North America, which the Norse called Vinland, right? And so you can see the sort of Scandinavian homelands over there, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and then this exploration and settlement of the North Atlantic, including Iceland, Greenland, Baffin Island, Labrador, in eastern Canada, as well as Newfoundland, which the Norse called Vinland. So this Norse agricultural lifestyle is developed in the Scandinavian homelands, and then they export it to Greenland and Iceland, but it really doesn't fit with the extreme northern climate. And I know what you're thinking, isn't Scandinavia really far north? Yeah, Iceland and Greenland are even further north, right? So these, the settlers can grow grain in Iceland and Greenland, but they can only grow barley. Wheat can't grow that far north. They're pastoralists. They can raise sheep and goats, but the land is so poor that they can't raise them in large numbers. So the Norse settlement in Greenland and Vinland was also distinguished from other settlements in the North Atlantic by the presence of native peoples. There are indigenous people living there, already inhabiting this land. And so yeah, this is a replica of Eric the Red, father of Leif Erikson, the sort of explorers, and also Eric the Red was a murderer who got kicked out of Iceland. That's why he had to go to Greenland. So the saga stories are filled with good stuff like this. So what are they doing? They're trading, they're exploring with native peoples. And so these native peoples, and there are two cultures that are particularly important, the Dorset culture, which is a Paleo-Eskimo culture, which preceded the Thule Inuit culture, and these were the ancestors of all modern Inuit people in Greenland and northern Canada. And these people are indigenous hunter-gatherers, with an emphasis on the hunting, especially whale and seal hunting, but also fishing. And the Norse call them Skraelings in their sources, and we have primary sources, primary documents about them. In general, though, the Norse refused to adapt or take cues to how to adapt to the land from the native peoples. So, for example, native Inuit people in Greenland had their diet was mostly marine food sources, including fish, seal, walrus, and it made up between 50 and 80% of the diet. They could survive in this land on a way that barley and a few sheep are just not going to do it. The Greenlander settlements vanish by the 14th century, and archaeologists think this is because of increasing conflicts with the indigenous people. The Thule Inuit people were stronger militarily than the Vikings for the climate. They were technologically superior. The Inuit invented toggling harpoons for hunting and dog sleds as a primary means of overland transport. The Norse had great ship technology, but that's it. They were technologically inferior to the indigenous people. So in Vinland, in North America, the Viking settlements just never properly took hold. And indeed, before 1961, the only evidence that we had is from saga literature about this Norse exploration and colonization. So the sagas here, this is the saga, an excerpt from the Greenlander saga, which talks about a small settlement in Vinland, which included 60 men and 5 women, and their encounters with these native peoples. So they say, early in the second winter, the Skraelings came back again, that is, the native peoples. This time, there were many more of them, and they brought same sorts of trade goods to trade as before. But then a Skraeling was killed by one of the leader Karl Stefni's men for attempting to make off with some of these weapons. The Skraelings cleared off as fast as they could, leaving their clothes and trade goods behind. Now, we need to come up with a plan, said Karl Stefni, for I think they'll come back for a third visit, and this time they'll be hostile and more numerous. That is indeed true. I've taken out the fight scene. Sorry, guys. The native people and the Vikings fight. Some are killed on each side. Karl Stefni and his companions remained there for the whole winter, but in spring, Karl Stefni announced that he didn't want to stay any longer, and he wanted to go home to Greenland. So, scholars rightly distrusted this as the only source for the Viking exploration and colonization of the New World. However, in addition to this lovely historical information, we also have the sagas are filled with magic, with gods, with magic swords. It's a really cool one, by the way. Other fantastical elements. So, however, in 1961, archaeologists discovered the remains of an 11th century Viking settlement at La Anse Meadow in Newfoundland. It's modern-day Newfoundland. This new land was it's too far from the home bases in Iceland or Scandinavia to make large-scale settlement an option. The Viking settlement were colonies, and they were dependent upon trade with the homelands to sustain them. So, in addition to this distance, though, this place was not empty. It was occupied by the indigenous peoples that we've just talked about, who were really not too keen on having foreign strangers set up settlements on their lands. And this was just a winter camp. It was good for staying over to fix your boats during the harsh Atlantic winter storm season before heading home to Scandinavia in the spring with goods to trade back home, right? So this is not a permanent settlement in any way. So even before La Anse Meadow was found and properly excavated by archaeologists in the 1960s, though, there were people who wanted to find evidence of material culture that proved the Vikings had been to North America. This intensified in the 19th and 20th centuries. I know, there's a theme here. And so while there are many ideological and racist claims about Norse exploration, one hoax in particular stands out, probably because it wasn't about racism, but actually nationalism and maybe homesickness. So this is the Kensington Runestone, and it was found in Minnesota. So the upper Midwest saw a lot of Scandinavian immigration in the 19th century, and it's likely that this community brought their saga stories with them about the Norse exploration of North America. And from that base, they embellished the stories, telling themselves they're not the first Scandinavians in Minnesota, right? There's all players there. No, there's other previous immigrants from the Middle Ages. And in 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer / stonemason found this rune stone. Now the runes say that it was placed in 1362. And the stone was actually displayed at the Smithsonian Museum between 1948 and 1953 before it was decisively debunked by scholars as a total hoax and fake by scholars of Old Norse languages in 1958. So lest you think it is only the people of the past who fall for hoaxes, this is a screenshot of a fake news article from 2014, and I cannot tell you how many times this was posted on my Facebook wall. I had just moved to Mississippi, and everyone's like, "Did you hear about this?" And I was like, I had to write this long post about how it was a fake. So, right? And so this is like, Viking ship was discovered near Memphis. No, not true. From this fake article here. So some hoaxes, though, are more persistent. So here's an example that most are coming from ideology, right? They have ideology motivating them, and usually racist ideology. Racism or nativism. But I'm going to end with this one, which is a little bit more complicated than that. So this is the Vinland map. So the Vinland map is claimed to be a 15th century mappa mundi, a map of the world. And it's currently held at the Beinecke Rare Book Library at Yale. And it is very well known because of the publicity campaign which accompanied its revelation to the public as a genuine pre-Columbian, I'm going to put genuine in quotation marks there, as a genuine pre-Columbian map. And it was presented to the world in 1965 with an accompanying scholarly book written by the British Museum and Yale University librarian. So you can see this is a map of the world, right? We've got Spain, France, England here, but also Africa, East Asia, but also out here we have Vinlandia. You can see it there. So, right, so this is purported to be a map that shows sort of knowledge of the New World before Columbus. So shortly after this book came out and all of this hoopla in 1965, historians of geography and cartography and medieval document specialists began to suspect that it might be a fake really as soon as the photographs became available. So this parchment, which is made out of the hide of a calf, has been radiocarbon dated, and it is from the 15th century. So that is an old piece of parchment. However, the ink is problematic. It is not iron gall black ink, which is the most common black ink of the medieval period, and it's made from mixing these iron filings with organic materials from trees. In 2002, a chemical analysis was done of the ink, and scholars discovered that it was made of black carbon and anatase, which is a 20th century ink additive. So despite this evidence, the map's partisans still dispute this. Yale actually held an entire academic conference on the map in 2009, and as recently as 2018, they did a new microspectral analysis revealing that the parchment had actually been contaminated after 1950 with a chemical compound commonly used as a food additive. They think it's probably residue from hand lotion. So at this point in 2020, the evidence points pretty conclusively to forgery, especially the ink. But if it is a forgery, who forged it and why? Forgers always have a reason. Sometimes it's money or it's ideology, but in this case, an anonymous donor bought the map on the open market and donated it to Yale, so it's probably not about money. So Dr. Kristen Siever, a professor at Stanford, wrote an entire book on this map, and she has another idea. She argues that the original volume and the 15th century paper, right, or 15th century parchment, which the Vinland map was drawn, was part of a private library at Mikkeljärv Castle in Moravia, now the modern-day Czech Republic, and it was auctioned off in 1933. I know, we've got more Nazis coming. The volume came into the hands of Joseph Fischer. This is actually a Jesuit priest, and you see his dates there, right? Killed in 1944. He's a Jesuit priest, and he was an internationally known historian of cartography, teaching in Austria during the rise of the Nazis. So Fischer had an interest in Norse history and geography, and he might have made this fraudulent map at a time when he was retired, forced retirement, and he was under threat from anti-Jesuit Nazis, right? They had confiscated his school and forced him to flee to Munich. And he was really distressed at the Nazis' manipulative efforts to rewrite history and geography to create this record of their glorious Aryan past, which included hegemony over the Norse world. So this forgery might be an act of intellectual sabotage, meant to mock anti-Catholic Nazis by creating a map that emphasized the early and widespread influence of the Catholic Church, because that's the other thing this map is doing, is really emphasizing the Christian world and Catholicism and its spread across the globe at the end of the Middle Ages. So this is speculative. It doesn't have the hard evidence needed to put it into a history book officially. It's a pretty fantastic story, right? And it fits the evidence currently available on the map itself, especially the ink. The technology is getting better year by year to help date and understand medieval manuscripts, whether they are genuine or forgeries like this one. And every time I talk about the Vinland map, there's another new article, another piece of research, and so perhaps one day we will actually crack its secrets. So I have to confess that I have been thinking about giving this lecture on the uses of the Middle Ages in the modern world for 2.5 years now, ever since the racist Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in August 2017. Because while that rally was ostensibly about objections to the removal of Confederate monuments, which is a totally other lecture about the uses and misuses of history, the imagery of those neo-Nazis and those alt-right marchers with medieval shields and banners, it shook me and many other medievalists like me to our core, both professionally and personally. So I had to do quite a bit of research on 20th century fascism to do the subject justice, which is not my academic specialty, and shout out to those people in this room who study Nazis, but I'm actually not one of them. And so it felt more urgent the more that I learned about what was going on here. So one book that helped me tremendously with it was this book, Whose Middle Ages, which was published only last year. And if you're at all interested in this, I'd urge you to check it out. And since we're doing book plug, I'm going to plug my own book too, The Curse of Distant Places. And so my book is on migration and religious movement in the Middle Ages, from pilgrimage and mission to exile and slavery, right? And so this is the kind of thing where the questions that you ask, right? The questions that you ask open are from what you're interested in, but also hopefully open up new avenues of exploration. So when answering the question, what is the use of history, right? That's what Marc Bloch started with. Marc Bloch said, historians should seek to write history with integrity, with truth, and therefore with difficulty. And writing and reading history with integrity is difficult. It's supposed to be. It means that we must question those things that seem true or obvious, but which are legacies not of the real people of those ancient and medieval societies, but of ourselves and our own modern world. So in order to bust those myths about the so-called Dark Ages, don't call it that, it's important to set aside some of the ideas about the past that we grew up with. Our understanding of the past, our historical consciousness, is always shaped by how it was taught to us. However, when we re-examine our ideas about the past in light of cutting-edge scholarship It can help us shake off these antiquated ideas that reflect neither pre-modern historical realities nor who we are in the 21st century today. Thank you for your time.
That was a great talk, and I think it gave us a pretty clear indication of why Dr. Luckhardt has received the Mississippi Humanities Council Teacher of the Year Award. We have a few minutes for questions about this pretty cool topic.
You want to ask me questions about Nazis?
No, I want to ask a question about the Middle Ages, which is to say that, thank you, that was wonderful, great talk. When you were talking about Himmler digging up the Saxon king of Saxony, what I was thinking about was Edward I digging up Arthur and Guinevere, in the Middle Ages, and, all of the Arthurian legends and so forth that were written in the Middle Ages. And so, can you make any connections or kind of compare and contrast using medievalism in the modern world to using medievalism in the Middle Ages? I mean, were the goals similar? Maybe not the same emphasis on race, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the people of the Middle Ages had their own ideas about the past, and they were actually obsessed not with the Middle Ages, but with the Roman past. And so that, when they're looking back at Arthur, they're looking back towards this sort of imagined Roman past, the glory of Rome and things like that. And so, absolutely, this is a human trait. Just think of the time before was obviously the better one, and we're going to get our legitimacy from there, because we can't get it here. We have to get it from some imagined past that we make up for our own propaganda purposes. And yeah, absolutely, the people of the Middle Ages did this too, right? They're absolutely thinking about, Arthur fighting, as this sort of Roman general / also ideal knight of their own era as well. So they put all of their ideas about their own culture and their ideas about their past onto those Arthurian stories. Thank you.
And yes, I was just thinking, what about, we hear common notion of knights, damsels in distress, castle sieges. Was that more actual like Victorian romanticism as
Yep. I mean, there are absolutely, things that the Victorians are reading from the Middle Ages. They're reading that 12th and 13th century Arthurian literature, and then they're putting their own spin on it, absolutely. And so sort of thinking about it in their own way. But they are reading medieval literature, they're just reading it through their own lens. And interpreting it. I mean, there are castle sieges, right? There are sort of fantastic poetry and prose about Arthur and Guinevere from the Middle Ages. But sort of our sort of stereotypical ideas are absolutely coming from the Victorians. They're not coming from the medieval texts themselves.
Could those be misinterpretations then of past literature versus past historical document?
Well, I mean, these sources are literature, yes, but they also are sort of using historical sources as well. And so medieval people, they didn't really make a distinction between fiction and nonfiction the way that we do. Those aren't actually medieval genres. And so those sort of literary stories are also, I mean, our first Arthurian tales are written down by a historian called Geoffrey of Monmouth in his History of the Kings of Britain. And then he tells you all of these fantastical Arthurian stories as well. And so just like the Greenlander saga, right, is this mashup of fantastical elements with magic swords, but also some real historical information. That's how medieval people sort of shaped their narratives. Their narratives aren't fact versus fiction. Good question.
Dr. Luckhardt, excellent lecture. Thank you for that.
Another medievalist here, so.
An observation and then a question. Listening to you, I was struck, reminded how in the 19th century, in Britain and in Ireland, there's pretty much an identical thing going on. You mentioned Victorians. Well, the Irish were busy doing things with the so-called Celtic revival and drawing upon these supposedly Celtic things from the distant misty past of Ireland and so forth, and putting them to much the same uses in the political context of political conflict between Ireland and Britain at that time. My question is, for those poor souls who are not medievalists.
We're sad for you.
Sorry. How would you suggest, what are some ways that we, all of us, can help combat these misappropriations of the historical past? You know, when we encounter them on social media or in conversation or really anywhere, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, these misappropriations, I mean, I think the best way to sort of combat these ideas is to think about the idea about fantasy, right? Because fantasy novels are fun, fantasy TV is fun, but it doesn't represent it's imagined, and it's supposed to be imagined because it's fun. But these ideas, when you sort of twist them and turn them into something else, I think the best way to combat them is to think about how, not just what's fun, but also what can be dark about fantasy, right? Because, if you read any fantasy or science fiction or something like that, you know that, like, for instance, Tolkien didn't understand women at all, right? You know ladies in their interior lives in Tolkien, right? And so you can question these ideas of whether they're coming in fictional form or whether they're coming at you in this kind of sort of barrage of social media. And I think the best way to combat this is really to ask questions, always, right? And you can ask questions from your personal experience. That is good bias, right? That is bias where we ask, what's the agenda of these guys using these Roman or fascist or medieval symbols? And what's their agenda? So asking those questions, I think, is the best way. Thank you.
I'm looking at this book, Whose Middle Ages, and thinking about your wonderful talk, and I'm wondering if race was not a way that people in the Middle Ages thought about difference, the concept they would have understood at all, then what is the responsibility of the medieval historian in thinking about racial issues today? Is it what you did today? Is it debunking people who import race into those situations, or is there another responsibility? Do you look for diverse voices and even maybe try to read race into certain situations?
Yeah.
Or?
That's a great question. So it's not that medieval. So I think the interesting part is that it's not that medieval. So there's a sort of difference in terminology here between race and ethnicity, right? And so race is sort of what we think of in the sort of modern world as sort of phenotypes and color and things. And so medieval people definitely had ideas about ethnicity. But those ideas are stuff like, and you're a barbarian who speaks a Germanic language, and he's a Roman, and he wears his hair in this way, right? And so they were absolutely, I mean, we could call them racist, right? They were ethnocentric. I don't want to sort of put another idealized version of medieval people like they didn't see race. Oh, they did. They just didn't see it the way we see it, right? There are sort of terrible ideas about Jews in lots of medieval historical literature. There are ideas, when we talk about the Crusades, we have ideas about, countering Islam. And so it's not that they didn't see difference. They definitely saw difference. And so I think the way when we ask these questions about whose Middle Ages, we can ask, like, what did they see, right? Because they didn't see the world the way we see it. So we have to ask the question, what did they see? And they absolutely saw a difference in language and hairstyle and ethnicity and religion and all these other categories. But race just isn't one of them, right? And it's something that as modern people we kind of struggle with. Like, of course, didn't they know that St. Maurice was black? Yeah, they knew. They just didn't care, right? That wasn't important to them when they were venerating this saint who was killed for his Christian beliefs. That was what was important to them, not what color he was. So they definitely saw a difference. Thanks.
Follow up. Do you trace your interest in history to the Renaissance fairs?
All right, so here's the real story. Yes, but no. So I did the Renaissance Fair when I was a kid, and then I went to college and I found out I was really good at Latin. And so that's where my real actually interest began. It's one thing to dress up as a pretty princess. It's the other thing to be able to read the sources. And so that was the real. It's Latin. It's not the Renaissance Fair. Come on.
About your primary sources, it's hard in this industrial age to think about sources because we churn it out so much. Where do you find your primary research documentation?
European manuscript libraries, right? So all of those conferences I go to, I'm also going to the library. So most of my manuscripts are in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. But I've also done work at the British Library, Oxford and Cambridge and things. And then there's also lots of editions of these sources, and so like printed editions from the 19th century. So they're not translated, but they're printed. So someone has done the work of decoding the manuscript for you. So those are kind of the two primary ways I get my sources.
I was looking at the art that you had, the lady and the knight.
Yeah.
And I've seen these artworks before. Are they all from the 1800s? Or are they all?
Yeah, yeah, they are. Yeah, those are all the pre-Raphaelite artists. So the first one is Waterhouse, the second one was Rossetti, and those pre-Raphaelites were obsessed with the Middle Ages. So yeah, so those ones that you're probably familiar with. But there's lots of amazing art from the Middle Ages as well, and I didn't get put as much of that in as I usually do in my talks. But yeah, it's wonderful. So.
Time for maybe one or two more. So I wanted to ask if you think, or at this moment in the 21st century, are we seeing kind of a spike in interest in the Middle Ages? Or is this kind of just kind of persistent interest?
There's a pretty persistent interest in the Middle Ages, but I don't know. I mean, and maybe it's just that it kind of came to the fore for me in 2017, and a lot of medievalists, right? Like this is a sort of thing we've been talking about at Kalamazoo. We don't just dance. But it has sort of come to the fore. And I mean, white supremacists have been using like getting Viking rune tattoos and things like this for a very, very long time. So that's not new, but the sort of public attention on this because sort of post 2017, I think is sort of, it seems like a spike. I don't know whether it's actually a spike in interest, but rather just sort of public, sort of public-facing nature of it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give Dr. Luckhardt one more round.